On May 24th, 2004, the 911 emergency number in Oregon, USA, received a call with a voice mixed with anxiety.
911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I've got someone who's missing, a worker of mine that we can't seem to find. Missing from where? I'm the manager of the Oak Park Apartments, and this worker actually happens to be my sister-in-law. She's 19. When was the last time anybody saw her? Around 10:30.
At the time, no one thought anything serious had happened. But just a few hours later, the college town of Corvallis, a place as peaceful as a picture, suddenly became unusual. In the middle of the empty courtyard of the apartment complex, people discovered a few abandoned items: a plastic bucket, a pair of women's slippers, and some faint mud stains on the ground. There were no screams, no witnesses, just a vague space where a girl had been. Her name was Brooke Wilberger, 19 years old, pretty, hard-working, loved by everyone around. Having just returned from Brigham Young University for the summer, Brooke always tried to help her family, even with simple tasks. No one expected that on that mild spring morning, when the sunlight was still thinly covering the treetops, the girl would disappear as if she had never existed. The disappearance left no clear sound or sign, only a long silence and a growing sense of unease in the hearts of her loved ones. On the morning of May 24th, 2004, the Oak Park apartment complex welcomed a peaceful new day. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and the surrounding trees were swaying gently in the early morning breeze. The entire apartment complex seemed to still be immersed in the silence of a weekday morning. Brooke Wilberger, a 19-year-old girl who had just returned from Brigham Young University, woke up early. She did not rush or complain, just quietly prepared everything to start a working day as usual. Living with her sister during the summer break, Brooke took on the task of helping manage the apartment complex with simple but regular tasks: cleaning the lampposts in the yard, checking the cleanliness of the campus, picking up trash around the parking lot. That morning, she wore a light-colored t-shirt, jeans, and her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. A simple, unfussy outfit that reflected her personality: simple, down to earth, and always ready to help others. At around 9:45 a.m., several residents reported seeing Brooke walking through the neighborhood carrying a plastic bucket and cleaning supplies. One recalled nodding, and Brooke responded with a small smile and continued her work. No one paid any more attention because her presence was always so familiar. At 10 a.m., Brooke's older sister, Stephanie, caught a glimpse of her sister from a second-floor window as she bent down to get something near the parking lot. It was a seemingly ordinary moment, but it was also the last time she saw Brooke. After that, Brooke disappeared completely. No unusual noises, no scenes of chaos, no warning signs. Some later reported hearing a strange sound, perhaps a scream or a light crash. But all of it was too vague for anyone to act on. Plus, Corvallis was a quiet town. People here were not used to the sudden crime scenario happening in broad daylight. But the unusual had happened quietly, and Brooke's disappearance was not the result of carelessness or a youthful impulse. It was a cold void, where the only sign was an unnatural silence that grew as the hours passed. Brooke's sister, busy with her childcare, was still sure that her brother would return on time as promised. But as the clock ticked toward noon, the first premonitions began to appear. Vague but so clear that it made her shiver involuntarily. Around 1 p.m., as the sun began to deepen in the backyard of the Oak Park apartment complex, Stephanie, Brooke's older sister, suddenly stopped cleaning the kitchen. Intuition made her glance back at the clock. Brooke should have been home long ago. Her initial feeling was just a little puzzled. Maybe her sister was busy working or had stopped to chat with someone. But when the children started calling for lunch and Brooke still hadn't appeared, that puzzlement quickly turned into an inexplicable unease. Brooke was a punctual person. She never missed an appointment or made anyone worry. In the family, she was the one everyone could always count on. If she promised to be home by 12, she would be standing at the door by 5 to 12. But today there was no phone ringing, no late text, no sign that Brooke had ever left the area. Stephanie tried to stay calm, stepping out into the hallway and calling her sister's name. There was no answer. She walked along the walkway around the apartment complex, her eyes scanning the familiar corners. A few neighbors smiled politely, but no one seemed to notice. Things only really changed when Stephanie approached the parking lot. In one corner of the yard, she saw the plastic bucket Brooke had brought with him that morning, lying on the ground. A pair of women's slippers were left a few feet away, slung across the small path leading to the back lawn. Her instincts told her that something was up. She rushed to Brooke's car. It was parked neatly in its usual spot, locked, with no sign of forced entry. Inside the car, Brooke's purse, wallet, and phone were still there, as if she had just left for a few minutes, but never returned. The anxiety was no longer a feeling. It had become a tangible, chilling fear that seeped into every crevice of her spine. Stephanie immediately called her husband, and within minutes the two of them were knocking on doors, asking around. But all they got were shaken heads and blank looks. No one remembered seeing Brooke after about 10 a.m. At around 2 p.m., Stephanie's husband didn't hesitate to call 911. The call wasn't simply a missing person report. It was the beginning of a search that no one in the Wilberger family could have imagined would last for months, even years. A disappearance in broad daylight, no witnesses, no goodbyes, and no one knows that they have just lost their last chance to prevent the tragedy that is about to unfold. Immediately after receiving the missing person call, local police quickly arrived at the Oak Park apartment complex. Although this was only an initial report, the response team handled it with the utmost caution because everything at the scene was so unusual. Brooke's car was intact. There were no signs of a break-in or unusual movement. Personal items, wallet, phone, handbag, were all left in the car, undisturbed. Not far away, a plastic bucket had been knocked over, cleaning supplies scattered around the ground. All within a small area, but it gave the impression that someone had been snatched away. Near the base of the lamppost, where Brooke was last seen, police discovered a few smeared, dragged dirt marks that appeared to indicate a brief struggle. Although there was no blood, no torn fibers, no obvious fingerprints, these anomalies were quickly flagged and carefully collected. What made the investigation difficult was the absence of security cameras. The entire apartment complex had no outdoor surveillance system. In addition, no witnesses saw Brooke being taken away or noticed any suspicious behavior that morning. A scene with no noise, no witnesses, and no blood. But that silence, to the police, was what made them most alarmed. As soon as Brooke was reported missing, investigators quickly began analyzing data from the neighborhood and the nearby university campus. Since there were no cameras or eyewitnesses at the scene, initial leads fell through. However, a small but noteworthy detail began to shed light on the case. Several students said they had seen a dark blue minivan wandering around the area that morning. One female student described being stopped by a strange man asking for information. When he got out of the car and opened the back door, she sensed something was wrong and immediately ran away. Another student said the driver had a license plate from another state, possibly Minnesota. Although not directly related, the pieces began to fit together. Police began to expand their investigation to include records of harassment, assault, or other unusual behavior near the Corvallis area. One of the names that stood out was Sung-Kuk Chun, a man who lived more than 100 kilometers away and had been arrested for breaking into a girls' dormitory and stealing underwear. During a search of his home, police discovered thousands of personal items belonging to women and many creepy computer files. However, when investigators examined the evidence closely, they discovered that Chun had a clear alibi. He was at home with his parents at the time of Brooke's disappearance, and all the digital data confirmed this fact. Although he was prosecuted for other crimes, Chun was eliminated as a prime suspect. Just when the case seemed to be at a standstill, an event that occurred more than 2,000 kilometers away completely changed the situation. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, a Russian female student suddenly ran into the middle of the street in a state of panic. She had just escaped a kidnapper. People quickly called the police, and from the victim's testimony, a portrait of the suspect gradually emerged. A white man, shaved head, carrying a knife and driving a red car with a distinctive red interior pattern. Based on the description, it didn't take long for the police to track down Joel Patrick Courtney, a 38-year-old man, unstable, with a criminal history. When he was arrested, he was also carrying a knife and items that matched the victim's testimony. But what was special was, travel records showed that Joel had appeared in Oregon at the time Brooke went missing. The investigation turned to Joel. The police secretly searched for the minivan he had used. When they found this vehicle, they immediately sent it for forensic examination. The results stunned the team. Inside the car, investigators found traces of Brooke's DNA, along with a hair stuck in a personal bag. This was the first time in months that physical evidence had established a direct connection between the victim and the suspect. Joel was questioned several times. Initially, he denied any involvement in the case. However, his testimony was constantly contradictory, sometimes saying he was somewhere else. Other times, he was silent and did not answer. Investigators took advantage of Joel's psychological weaknesses: impulsiveness, lack of self-control, and a tendency to brag. During a conversation with a fellow inmate, he accidentally mentioned the girl in Oregon, prompting the prison to report it to the police. The pressure was mounting. The police continued to consolidate their case with the pieces they had collected: travel data, witnesses who had seen the car, statements from other victims, and especially biological traces in the car. With the evidence strong enough, prosecutors formally filed preliminary charges against him, including kidnapping, assault, and suspected murder. However, with Joel already in custody in New Mexico, extradition to Oregon was fraught with legal complications. Meanwhile, investigators continued to dig into his past, finding repeated patterns of behavior: stalking women, driving near dorms, and having his wife file a restraining order. As the case piled up, Oregon law enforcement prepared for a major trial. Although Brooke's body had not yet been found, biological evidence, witness testimony, and Joel's repeated behavior were enough to hold him and bring the case to a critical juncture. After nearly a year in custody and many rounds of legal proceedings, Joel Patrick Courtney was officially brought to trial in the state of Oregon. The trial attracted widespread attention from the media, the public, and those who had followed the Brooke Wilberger case for many years. The courtroom that day was filled not only with reporters, but also with those who had participated in the search for Brooke, people who had never forgotten the morning she disappeared. At the trial, Joel faced a series of serious charges: kidnapping, assault, and the most serious charge, first-degree murder. The prosecutor opened with a brief but powerful presentation. "We will show you not only the crime, but also the cold-blooded calculation that lasted for months." The evidence lined up logically. Brooke's DNA in the suspect's car, a hair still attached to his leg, and details about where Joel had been staying near the crime scene during that time. The defense tried to create doubt by pointing to Joel's drug history and unstable mental state. But when the tape of his confession was played back in the courtroom, where Joel told a fellow inmate that they would never have found her if I hadn't wanted them to, the courtroom fell silent. The biggest highlight of the trial came on the fourth day of the trial, when Joel abruptly changed his testimony. After repeatedly denying it, he suddenly admitted that he had seen Brooke that morning. However, he claimed it was accidental and denied any harm to her. The prosecutor immediately dismissed the statement, pointing out the contradiction with his previous assertions that he had never set foot in Corvallis. The community, especially Corvallis residents, watched the trial with mixed emotions every day. Many who had been involved in the search for Brooke said it felt like a reliving of old memories as they listened to the evidence. The Wilburgers sat silently throughout the trial, their eyes filled with fortitude, but unable to hide their pain. When the verdict was read, the courtroom stood still. Joel Patrick Courtney was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This is not just a case of loss, the judge emphasized, but a case of justice, even when the truth comes late. After the trial ended, Brooke's mother spoke briefly. "Nothing will bring my daughter back, but at least we know the truth, and we can start learning to live again." The Brooke Wilburger case ended with a harsh sentence for the perpetrator, but the void she left behind is something that nothing can fill. The family lost a gentle daughter. A future full of hope was snatched away when it was still incomplete. Many residents of Corvallis still remember the moment they walked together through every trail, through the woods, hoping to find even the smallest sign. Although justice was served, the pain still lingers. From that story, a loud message resonates, that even in the safest of communities, danger can still be silently present. No one could have predicted that a clear morning would become the starting point for a series of haunting days. The law may come later, but when the truth is revealed, it will not stay silent. At the same time, the story also serves as a reminder of perseverance, of solidarity, and of people who are willing to never give up for a glimmer of hope. And after all, a question remains, not just for the police or prosecutors, but for all of us. If such a tragedy happened to your loved one, what would you do to ensure that justice does not fall asleep?